Are you new to fantasy and wanting to get deeper into the genre? Or are you just curious about my journey into fantasy and epic fantasy? Let's talk about books. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm the Lit Wizard. I like literature. I think it's lit. And I'm a wizard. And today I want to talk to you about fantasy, your journey into fantasy, how you can go from a new fantasy reader or a brand new fantasy reader into more epic fantasy and get further into the genre, explore more subgenres of fantasy. And through that, talk a bit about my history with fantasy, where I got started reading and where I'm at now. The very first fantasy book I remember getting into, and I think a lot of people my age probably started in the same place, Harry Potter. I've got my own feelings around Harry Potter and around that brand now. However, that was still what introduced me to fantasy as a genre, and I think introduced a lot of people to fantasy as a genre. For me, it was grade 5, so I think that would have been 2001. I would have been 11. And my grade 5 teacher, Ms. Johnson, shout out, decided to read the first book to the class over the course of several weeks. From that point, I remember getting sucked into the story. I remember asking my parents for copies of the book and for the next books in the series. And my parents ended up getting really into it as well. I think my mom and dad each had their own copies of Harry Potter, and we kind of read it as a family as the new books came out. I distinctly remember the launch of the final book. It was the only midnight launch that I ever really did. I remember going, getting set up, having a lawn chair, and just like hanging out with a bunch of other people, making friends with the people in line behind me, as well as the people in front of me, people that I never would have met otherwise. And one of them I ended up dating for a little while. Spoiler alert. And that's not something you get to experience as much these days. You don't have as many like midnight launches. And I don't think we've ever really seen the level of hype around Harry Potter again. I remember the excitement of waiting in line, of being able to go up and get my copy of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, being able to crack the book open and be one of the first people in the world to read the book. The person in front of me in line decided to give me a ride home. At the time, I didn't drive. I was a teenager. I would have been taking the bus, but she drove me home. I read the book in the car on the way back to my house. I went to my bedroom, I got out of my bed, and I did not put that book down until it was done. I read the entire book in one sitting. And from that point on, I was chasing that same kind of like unput downable adventure, that same kind of book that would hook me and draw me into another series. The only copy that I have left now of the original book is this American edition of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. For us, the correct version of the book is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I always preferred the US covers. I thought they were a lot more whimsical and fun and had a better feel for the book, even if the names were wrong. From there, the next series that I kind of got into to chase that Harry Potter high, I also don't have a physical copy of, but will pop up a cover here as well. It was Eragon, which was the first book of the Inheritance cycle. That was another one that I really loved. I enjoyed that book immensely. My dad also really enjoyed that book, but once we completed reading it, I think it was like quite a while before there was ever another book in that series, and I completely lost interest in it. I moved on. I never tried reading the following books in the cycle, and that was kind of my second introduction to fantasy and kind of like epic fantasy, and where I started exploring and starting to dive into other fantasy books to see what might hook me the way that the Harry Potter series did. And the next fantasy series that did hook me was probably The Hunger Games. And again, I don't have my original copies of The Hunger Games, but I do have this newer edition here with the fun, fancy sprayed edges, but I really loved The Hunger Games. That was probably a couple of years after I finished Harry Potter and had tried Eragon. I had the same kind of pull to me that the Harry Potter series did. It's another one where I haven't like dove into like the newer books outside of that original trilogy, but I did love those original books. Did not love the ending of book 3, and maybe that's something I'll talk about eventually. My next kind of foray into fantasy and the next fantasy series that I picked up and got really into was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I've talked about this book as well on my channel before. This one is also very beginner friendly. I know there's very hot takes around A Darker Shade of Magic. A lot of people absolutely love it, really connected with the characters. I'm one of those people. It's what got me really excited about fantasy again and got me like really into, thicker books. As the series goes on, it gets a little bit chunky, but it was another one where like I couldn't put it down. When I got to that third book, I read it again in like 1 or 2 sittings and found myself pacing around my room trying to see what was going to happen with the characters and how their stories were going to be wrapped up. And I remember finishing that book and putting it down and thinking about it for several days afterwards. I'm sad to say, after A Darker Shade of Magic, I think I tried some other series, but I never really got drawn into another fantasy series for a few years. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I decided to jump back into fantasy. I looked around like, where is a good starting point for me? That's when I discovered Brandon Sanderson and decided to give Mistborn a shot, and I had no idea what to expect going into this. I just kept seeing Mistborn, great place to start for Brandon Sanderson, great place to start for fantasy in general, or to get into epic fantasy more. And I knew that there was like a thief involved to some extent, but that was all I knew about Mistborn and about the series. I picked it up, and it is incredible. It is so much fun. I recommend it to everybody, anyone I know who's like maybe in a book slump, wants to get back into reading, and it's hit for every single person I've recommended it to so far. The reason that it's such a great entry point is it's just very easy to read. The magic system is really interesting. The world building is very interesting. And the reason that Mistborn is such a great starting ground, especially if you're somebody who is very into Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, is the story is structured around what if the hero didn't win? What if the Dark Lord, what if the bad guy won? What is the universe? What does the world look like then? And how do they come back from that 1,000 years later? The other good thing about Mistborn is the books aren't super chunky. If you're worried about getting into really chunky epic fantasy and how to kind of gradually ease yourself into that, Mistborn is another great way to do that. The last great thing about Mistborn that I'll say before I move on to my next book is if you're wanting to get into the Brandon Sanderson universe, or the Cosmere as it's called, there are a lot of callbacks and characters to these books. But in this first trilogy of Mistborn, you're not really going to miss much. You don't have to have read anything else in the Cosmere in order to understand this book. And this brings me to the next book that I got into. It's typically not recommended to jump right from Mistborn into the Stormlight archives. There are other books that you can read along the way. Trust of the Emerald Sea is like a really good kind of like cozy fantasy entry in the Cosmere universe, which is a standalone. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is another good example of that. But you also have books like Elantris, Warbreaker that are probably better to read before jumping into the Stormlight archives. I ignored that entirely and went directly into The Way of Kings, which is when you start getting into the real chunky fantasy books. Oh, that was really satisfying. The Way of Kings, still like one of my favorite books of all time. Not my favorite book in the Stormlight archives. That award goes to Rhythm of War, which is a hot take. I know I've said that before, but I absolutely love the Stormlight archives. As far as big, chunky, epic fantasy goes, yes, the size of the book is intimidating, but you still have that really easy to read prose of Brandon Sanderson with a very easy to understand magic system and just an incredible world and universe that's been built. And there will be callbacks in the Stormlight archives to things like Mistborn or Warbreaker or Elantris, as this is Brandon Sanderson's big, epic, eventually 2-part, 10-book series that just finished the first part of 5 books. So between Mistborn, Stormlight archives, the rest of the Cosmere, I would kind of tie those together as like a good starting ground personally for epic fantasy and for diving into those kind of like chunkier fantasy worlds with interesting magic systems. Following the Stormlight archives, I wanted to dive more into some subgenres of fantasy and start exploring what else is there outside of just like your epic fantasy and your epic fantasy worlds with your big chunky books and your fun magic systems. And that's when I found John Gwynne. This I hadn't heard about yet on BookTube or on Reddit. I just saw this cover. And like, how can you not see this cover and just pick it up? You have this, I'm blocking the best part of it, but you have this giant dragon. It takes up basically the entire book, wraps around it. And then you've got little tiny guy down here trying to like fight the dragon. And you just see the scale of this world right on the cover of the book. You see the artwork. It just looks incredible. And I feel so lucky that it had a cover that drew me in and got me to read this book because it's incredible. It takes place in this epic fantasy world where kind of a war of their gods has taken place. The gods have been killed. They've killed themselves off. You have these giant structures made out of the bones of God that entire cities are built within. And you have people that are called the Tainted, which are descendants of these gods that have little fragments of their blood within them, and therefore little fragments of their power. So you have a dragon god, you have a snake god, you have a rat god, etc. And this is a universe where the gods destroyed people. The gods are looked at as being evil, and it's a good thing that they're dead. And the people that are descended from those gods have special collars on them to contain their power and are used as slaves. I won't dive too much further into the premise of the book, but it has some of my favorite characters in fantasy. It's more what you consider grimdark. The characters are very morally gray. There's a lot of fighting and just like epic, violent scenes within these books. If that's for you, amazing. Go pick these books up immediately and read them. If not, Grimdark may not be for you, and you might want to stick to like lighter fantasy or cozier fantasy. But if you want to get into Grimdark, I think John Gwynne is a great place to start. He has other series as well that are already finished that I haven't gotten into, but I'm excited to. From there, it was really obvious for me to get into Joe Abercrombie, though I didn't start with The First Law like most people would. I started with his new series, The Devils. The Devils has also had kind of a lukewarm reaction to it from book reviewers and from the BookTube community, especially people that are already really familiar with Joe Abercrombie. This book is a little bit different than The First Law, but is the start of a brand new trilogy. I absolutely loved it, and it made me want to get into more Joe Abercrombie, and I've since picked up The Blade itself and started reading First Law as well. If you're already really into Joe Abercrombie, you might have different feelings about The Devils, but if you're not into Joe Abercrombie and you're looking for a fun way to kind of transition into Grimdark, The Devils is for you. You're following kind of a ragtag group of monsters or devils that are sent on a mission by the Pope in this like fictionalized version of Europe, and you're following their journey across Europe to complete their quest, their adventure that they were assigned. Really fun, lots of super unique personalities in this group. Great twists along the way. Cannot recommend this book enough. The last book that I'll talk about is Dungeon Crawler Carl, because this is, again, its own kind of subgenre of fantasy in that it's lit RPG. So you're following a character, going through a dungeon, going through different levels of a dungeon, kind of like if they were playing World of Warcraft or Diablo or something of that nature, and leveling up, getting new gear, going through the motions, building their character, and progressing through this game. I mentioned Dungeon Crawler Carl because it's the most recent new series that I've gotten into, but I also think it's an incredible place to start if you're wanting to get into more fantasy. The books kind of get progressively more chunky over time, very similar to Harry Potter, and it's the most similar reading experience that I've had to Harry Potter. Obviously very different stories, very different characters. This is much more adult fiction than Harry Potter is, but I compare them in the sense that they're just incredibly easy to read, incredibly easy to breeze through despite their size. The characters are really fun. The story still has a lot of heart. It's a great place to get further into fantasy, to explore subgenres of fantasy, and to get into lit RPG. Genuinely cannot recommend any of the books or series that I've mentioned enough. I think any one of these is a really great place to start, depending on yourself and depending on your preferences. We've got some shorter epic fantasy, we have some chunkier epic fantasy, we have some lit RPG, we have some easy to read Grimdark, we've also got some dystopian fantasy, and just some nice entry level books into fun magic systems and unique worlds. I would love to hear from you what got you into fantasy and what your journey looked like. What did your fantasy rabbit hole entail? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps the channel. We're building a really great community here. I feel very lucky to have already built the community here that I have, and would like you to be a part of it as well if you're not already. As always, thank you for watching. Reading is a treat, and so am I. Goodbye.